Good morning. You see. Where's security? Security, you got to watch this front row here, man. It's good. So good to be with you guys today. We have been doing this series called Make Room for God. How's that been for you guys so far? It's been really good for me personally, and not only just stuff we've covered, but stuff we're still going to cover, still kind of like God is activating in my life too. So it's always fun. You know, a lot of times people will come up and they'll go, "Oh, thank you for that." And I'm like, you guys just got to listen to me preach to myself. You just happen to be snooping in on a conversation I'm having with God. So glad you guys are able to benefit from it as well. In this series, we've been talking about how we can't make God do anything, but we can make room for God to move, right? You can't make God move, but you can make room for him to move. We can position ourselves in a way where we're kind of going hands off and letting God do things. We've talked about the area of our relationships. We've talked about making room for a miracle. We talked about making room through rest. That was a very important one. If you haven't heard those, let me encourage you, go online and check those out. Hey, when you guys walked in, did you guys notice the barrels of food out there overflowing like that? Yeah, let me tell you what's going on there. Shelly Sexton and a children's ministry, and by the way, we have such awesome people in children's ministry. They're so cool. And you know, they've been encouraging and challenging the kids to be a part of feeding the poor in our community. Those kids, I happened to be there Wednesday. They brought in like 600 cans of food that they filled those things up with. And I want you to understand something. One of the things that I love about our children's ministry and the way that Shelly and the team, her great team, does things is, you know, they take the vision that we speak here and they bring it into children's ministry as well. So, you know, when we talk about the fact that one of our core values, one of our DNA core values is generosity, they do those things. And the neat thing is this. Think about this. From the time that they're in elementary school, I mean, we're talking little kids that are learning generosity from the get-go and learning that that's a part of the Christian life and that's just a part of the rhythm of how we do things as believers. Just think what it's like to grow up knowing that from the very beginning. Is that cool or is that cool? And so when you see these little kids or when you see Shelly and you see her teams, those of you that are picking up your kids, just high five them. Tell them what an awesome job they're doing and how thankful that you are that your children are getting the vision that God has for them right from the get-go. Man, it's awesome. So one more time, let's just tell God thank you. Thank you. Well, today I want to talk with you about one of those areas that is probably one of the most difficult for us to learn how to make room for God. It's one of those areas where, depending on our emotional state, it greatly affects whether or not we make room for God. And usually the thing that keeps us from making room for God is fear. And when fear begins to take over, how many of you know that when fear begins to take over, faith just kind of shrinks and shrivels up, right? Doesn't go away completely, but what happens is faith takes a backseat to fear, and then what happens is we begin to live lives just kind of closed in instead of wide open. And God, he wants so much to breathe into us this incredible sense of him living in us, him living through us. God wants to do so much in terms of just filling you with this awesome sense of living a life that is larger than you are, of living a life that is so generous, that is so big, that is bigger than any life that you could ever dream up for yourself. And it's like this whole sense of a whole mindset of generosity. You can be generous emotionally, you know, just loving and kind of warm and just kind of being this person who's got a generous heart. Any of you know people like that? When we were in college, Maria and I had a friend. Now, we were all, 19, 20 years old. And this guy's name was Teddy Catalano. Teddy was our age. But Teddy was he was Italian, and his family, had for generations, they would drive down to Chicago, they'd get produce, and they'd bring it all up to Milwaukee, and they would sell that. So they were in Chicago in the wee hours of the morning doing deals, and then they'd come up. And his family was kind of well known for their produce business. And Teddy, man, even when he was like 19 and 20, was like this old Italian guy. And Teddy would go, Mark, Maria, how you doing? How you doing? Oh, good to see you guys. And he had this raspy Italian voice at 20 years old. I don't know what that was, but and it was so cool. But Teddy was one of these guys that I always looked forward to seeing because his heart was so generous. He just love just gushed out of the guy. How you doing? How you doing? And it was kind of interesting because I was trying to find him on the internet to see what Teddy's doing today, and I saw that Teddy is a teacher in high school, and I was like, what a great place for Teddy Catalano to be, right? He has no idea I'm talking about him or anything, but generosity encompasses a whole heart. It encompasses our minds. It encompasses the way we think, the way we see things, and it's a huge deal. It's a life-changing thing. And generosity isn't always easy, depending on kind of what our mindset is and what our emotional state is. And throughout this whole series, we've been diving into the life of a prophet named Elisha. And Elisha had a situation come up where there was a commander in the army of Aram, or Syrian army, and in this situation, Naaman had a great deal of success. Now, the people of Israel were kind of under the thumb of the people of Syria at that time. And Naaman would launch raids into the nation of Israel, and they would, of course, plunder. They plunder other areas as well, and they were very wealthy. Naaman was an incredibly successful commander, very well respected. And Naaman, in one of his excursions, he got a young woman from Israel who became the household maid. And Naaman had everything going for him except one thing. He had leprosy. And the problem is you could be as successful as you want to be, but leprosy was something that everybody could see, and you could not hide it. A skin disease where you would turn white, and it would spread, and people looked at you as someone who had a curse on your life. It was considered, whoa, if you got leprosy, man, you've got a death sentence hanging on you. And he had this condition, and apparently there was a kindness about him, a quality about him that caused this young lady that was their maid to say to Naaman's wife, hey, I wish my Lord would go see this prophet in Israel, because there is a prophet in Israel that could heal him. And Naaman, he goes on and he tells the king of Aram, and he's like, hey, in Israel, apparently, this little girl said that if I go there, that there's a prophet there that can heal me. And the king of Aram goes, okay, let's go ahead and make this happen. So he goes ahead and he writes a letter to the king of Israel. And Naaman gets together a fortune. He gets together, 750 pounds of silver. He gets together 150 pounds of gold and clothing and all this stuff. You calculate this. Somebody estimated that it's in the area of $7 to $8 million. Because he's like, whatever it costs, I am so willing to pay to get rid of this leprosy. Well, the king in Israel gets the letter from the king of Aram, and he reads it, and it says, this is my servant Naaman, and I would like you to make sure that he gets healed, that he's healed. And the king of Israel, he's like, what? I'm being set up. He's like, I can't heal the guy. What am I going to do? I can't heal him. He said, what is he doing? He's trying to set me up. And he tears his clothes, and he's having a fit, and he's just afraid of what's going to happen. He thinks that this is going to be the end, and he's just flipping out when he gets this letter. Well, Elisha, the prophet, hears about this. And he says to the king, what makes you think this is all on you? Send him to me. What's the matter with you? By the way, this is an indication of the level of faith that was in the nation of Israel at the time. That the whole reason that they were under Syria's thumb was because they really had no faith in the land, and the king thought that this was his problem to solve. He didn't even think of bringing in Elisha. So the king of Israel tells Naaman, he says, hey, you go to the prophet Elisha. And so he's head there with his entourage. Now, Naaman's got this thing, like in a movie, figured out in his mind. He's like, okay, here's what's going to happen. We're all going to be kind of going there with my entourage, with all the pomp and circumstance that goes along with the military commander who's of great esteem going into the town. And he sends his servant ahead to Elisha's house, thinking that when he knocks on the door and he says, hey, Naaman the commander is coming, that Elisha's going to go, ooh, I better get out there then. And he's going to run out there, and he's going to see Naaman, and it's going to be this great big, Olympic opening ceremony, right? With all of the rings in this one. And then he's going to like wave his hands over Naaman. And everybody is going to be there to see this grand event where he waves his hands over Naaman and says, you are healed, Naaman, because you are so great. And it doesn't work out that way. Instead, what happens is, Naaman, when his servant knocks on the door, Elisha goes, okay, he tells his servant, tell you what, you go and you tell Naaman to go ahead and dip 7 times in the Jordan River. Go tell him to go baptize himself 7 times. And the servant runs out there. And he tells him, go dip 7 times into the Jordan River. And Naaman is like ticked off. I mean, if you put this much into the opening ceremonies in your mind, and you think this thing is going to be this awesome thing, and why wouldn't he be able to come out and talk to you face to face? Why would he not come out there and do the thing that he thought that he should do? And he's like, I can't believe this. I cannot believe that he would treat me like that. And he's like storming off. And his men are like grabbing onto his sleeves going, Naaman, 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 whoa, whoa, whoa there, boy. If he would have told you to do something great to get healed, wouldn't you have done it? Yeah. He's telling you to do something really simple. And Naaman was so mad because he's like, the Jordan is a muddy river. We've got beautiful rivers in Syria. Why would I come here and do this? And they're like, he's not asking you to do anything hard. He's asking you to do something simple. And if you would be willing to do something hard and grand, why don't you do something simple? And so Naaman goes down into the Jordan River, and you can almost picture the guy, going underwater and getting up and rolling his eyes, and doing this 7 times. The 7th time he comes out of the water, all of the leprosy is gone. He's completely healed. And so what he does is Naaman takes his whole entourage, and he's going to Elisha's place. And he gets there, and he says to Elisha, thank you. I want to give you all of this. I brought this gold, this silver, all this clothing for you. It's yours. I want you to have it. And Elisha goes, no, as surely as God lives, I'm not taking a dime from you. You just keep it. And when Naaman hears that, when Naaman looks at the fact that he's been healed, and then he hears the fact that the prophet won't take a dime, he says, you know what? I know that there's only one God now, and it's your God, the God of Israel. And he says, and from now on, for the rest of my life, I'm not going to worship anyone but the Lord. It's the only one I'm ever going to make sacrifices to, but I'm going to need some grace in an area, because when I take the king of Aram up to the temple to worship, in the idol, he has to bow, and I've got to bow with him, and I need God to forgive me for the fact that I have to bow to be able to bow with him. And Elisha says, go in peace, it's okay. And he rides off. Now Elisha's servant, Gehazi, is standing there. He's watched all this unfold. And here's where we pick up in 2 Kings chapter 5, starting in verse 20, it says, but Gehazi, the servant of Elisha, the man of God, said to himself, my master should not have let this Aramean get away without accepting any of his gifts. As surely as the Lord lives, I will chase after him and get something from him. And so Gehazi set off after Naaman. Now, if you sat down and you had a conversation with Gehazi, it makes perfect sense. Because here's what Gehazi would have told you. Hey, where do you think that gold and that silver and that clothing came from? He's been raiding our nation. He got that from us. He got that from our people. We're being oppressed by them. How dare foreigners come in here and benefit from being in part of our nation and being here? How dare foreigners who aren't paying in, receive the benefit of our country? How dare they? All I'm doing is taking back what already belongs to us in the first place. How dare they? How dare they let him get away without paying into this? And sometimes it's easy for us to begin to get a sense of entitlement. How dare anybody benefit? How dare they? And it's so easy to understand Gehazi's mindset. And so he does something that is unthinkable. He goes and he decides, I will go ahead and I will get it. Here's the first thing I want you to understand about this. This is what we call greed. Greed is disguised in many different ways. Sometimes greed is disguised as a sense of entitlement. Sometimes greed is disguised as everything that I have is meant for me to consume. I have a right to it. I've worked hard for it. I've earned this. Sometimes greed is envy, looking at what other people have and going, I should have that. They shouldn't. Greed takes a lot of different forms. But what I want you to see about greed right here is that greed makes you do things that you never imagined that you would do. It blinds you. It blinds his judgment. That here, in the midst of a miracle, in the midst of a Syrian commander becoming a believer in the true and living God, Gehazi wants to make it about money. It's very, very, very tempting to do that. You know, money is like, for a lot of people, gaining money is like a game. You know, we have sayings that have kind of died off now, but every now and then it crops up again when people say, whoever dies with the most toys wins. You know, sometimes people want to make a big deal about what money they make or their income, as though the number of digits that they have after the dollar sign is a way of keeping score. And that's a way of keeping score for people who really don't have a sense of identity of who they are. That's a way of keeping score for people who really don't understand where their true value lies. And it's like a game. And our whole world is filled with that game. People just love to play that game. And what happens is when you begin to engage in that kind of game, greed makes you do things that you never imagined that you would do. And it says when Naaman saw Gehazi running after him, he climbed down from his chariot and he went to meet him. Is everything all right? Naaman asked. Yes, Gehazi said. But my master has sent me to tell you that 2 young prophets from the hill country of Ephraim have just arrived. He would like 75 pounds of silver and 2 sets of clothing to give them. By the way, they wear a size, 20 like I do. So just that would be perfect. By all means, take twice as much silver, Naaman insisted. He gave him 2 sets of clothing, tied up the money in 2 bags, and sent 2 of his servants to carry the gifts for Gehazi. But when they arrived at the citadel, Gehazi took the gifts from the servants and sent the men back. Then he went and hid the gifts inside the house. Second thing I want you to see is that greed will make you begin to hide things. Hide things on your expense report. Makes you hide things from your spouse. Sometimes secret accounts begin to happen, or jars of money, or things begin to be in a place where you don't want anybody else to know. Greed begins to take over. It becomes consuming. And what's driving it all is either a sense of entitlement, a sense of fear that I don't have enough for today, or I won't have enough for tomorrow, that God won't take care of me, that if I do the right thing, it's going to hurt me financially, so I need to do this instead. And we begin to hide things. And it's in that place where we're really beginning to get taken over in our minds. by this thing called greed. It says when he went into his master, Elisha asked him, "Where have you been, Gehazi?" "I haven't been anywhere," he replied. Now, remember who he's talking to? A prophet. But he's also talking to the man that he has been with for a long time. He's talking to the man that has taught him so much about God. He's talking to the man that he has seen walk people through very difficult situations, through the loss of a child and then the miraculous raising up again of her child. He's walked with the prophet through how do you take a little bit of food and multiply it and feed a multitude. He's taken people from a place where they were in absolute destitution and with a little bit of oil and a little bit of flour able to make that last and last and last and last. That is, as people made room for God, that he had the front row seat. And there with the prophet the whole time. Here's what I want you to understand is that greed separates close friends. And what happens when he does not recognize it at this moment, this is a defining moment for him, a defining moment. And in this moment, he has a situation when Elisha says, "Where have you been?" And he goes, "I haven't been anywhere." What he doesn't realize is Elisha already knows where he's been. And this is the test. At this point, he could have sat there and went, "You know what, Elisha, I'll tell you exactly where I've been. I was so mad when you let Naaman go. I was so mad. That guy, he's been taken from our country. He's been, that stuff that he wanted to give us, that was ours. And I just kind of went crazy for a moment there. I was just so angry about the whole thing. And I chased him down and I made up this story and he gave me stuff and I went and I hid it. And I'm so sorry." And if he would have done that at that point, then Elisha probably said, "Okay, go take it back. Go take it back." And this is a defining moment where he could have gone that way, but instead of choosing their relationship over the money, he chose the money over the relationship. And the temptation that greed presents for us is put money over your relationships. Go ahead and do things in secret. Go ahead and hide things. Go ahead and lie and allow your fear of not having enough or your sense of entitlement to be more important to you than the people that God has placed in your life. That's what greed does. Some of you know that. Some of you have experienced family conflicts where everybody seemed to get along just fine until suddenly money became an issue. And all of a sudden, you find your family being split apart and being fragmented by the issue of money. Some of you have gone into business with people that you had friendships with, and everything was fine until the money became an issue. In this series, Greg Surratt, who preached this series, when he talks about it, he talked about the fact that when he was a teenager, that when they were in high school, that he and his friends started a band. And he said everything was great until they started making money. When they started making money, it just broke them apart. Greed will do that. It will cause you to put money above relationships, and it will separate close friends. And the riches that God brings into your life in the relationships and in the people suddenly take a back seat to something that's going to disappear. And it's hard. And it's so subtle. And we have to guard our hearts against it. So at that moment, then in verse 26, Elisha asked him, "Don't you realize that I was there in spirit when Naaman stepped down from his chariot to meet you?" Now that sounds creepy, doesn't it? He's like, "Don't you realize this?" See, here's one thing. Prophets were sometimes called seers, S-E-E-R-S, because they were able to see as though they were there. And what Elisha is saying is, don't you understand something? I was there. I could see it. I watched the whole scene unfold. I heard the conversation. I've watched the whole thing unfold. You've known me. What makes you think that that I wouldn't see that. You know, greed clouds your judgment to the extent that you kind of lose sense of what's right and what's wrong, and you lose a sense of judgment. You lose the sense of who the people are that you can trust and who the people that you can't trust. You get into relationships and businesses and opportunities that turn out to be with people that you never should have connected with in the first place, but you don't see it. And you don't see the people that you could trust. He says, don't you realize that I was there? Is this the time to receive money and clothing, olive groves and vineyards, sheep and cattle and male and female servants? In other words, is this what God is doing? Is this the season that we're in? Or are we in a different season that God has us in right now? Is this really something that God is doing, Gehazi, or is this your doing? Are you trying to grab the situation and manipulate it to your favor, or are you trusting? He says, because you've done this, you and your descendants will suffer from Naaman's leprosy forever. When Gehazi left the room, he was covered with leprosy. His skin was white as snow. Lesson being, greed will ruin your life. And it gets passed down to the children who are saddled with the legal issues that follow. And we've seen that happen time and time and time again. Is it any wonder that Jesus, when a young man came to him and they were in the midst of an estate settlement, he goes to Jesus because Jesus was wise, Jesus was a teacher, Jesus was a good judge, and he said, hey, Jesus, tell my brother to give me my share of the inheritance because I'm not getting my share because I'm entitled to more. Tell him to give it to me. Now, if any of you have ever been in a situation where there's been a settlement of an estate, you know how crazy it can get when it's like that. People clamoring and dividing over these things. And Jesus looks at the young man, and he says, who appointed me as an arbiter? Who's the one that said, I'm the one in charge of arbitration between you and your brother? He said this, take a look. He said, beware, guard against every kind of greed. Life is not measured by how much you own. Every kind of greed, whether it's entitlement, whether it's envy, or whether it's the assumption that everything that I have is meant for my consumption. All those are forms of greed. And he says, you got to be on your guard for this. Why? Because it comes so naturally to us. It sneaks up on us. And Jesus said, oh man, you got to be on your guard against this stuff. Life is not measured by how much you own. We don't keep score by how many digits are after the dollar sign. It's not the kind of the place that we have. When you get into family inheritances, let me tell you, it's important. It's so important to keep this in mind. When relatives start wrangling over who gets what and all that fighting takes place, I'm telling you what, you've got to say, God, you need to take control of my heart and my mind. And you need to just be on your guard against that. So how do we guard against greed? There are some very simple things that I want to share with you in how to be able to do that. How to guard against greed. All right, let's talk about these three things. Number one, you got to learn contentment. Learn contentment. Think about Gehazi. Here's a guy that has a front row seat on seeing miracles happening time and time and time again. Here's a guy who has a front row seat to know what God is saying to the nation. Here's a guy that has a front row seat on the miraculous. How many people do you think would have gladly changed places with Gehazi to get so close to the prophet Elisha that they're like, I just can't wait to see what God's going to do next. I can't wait to see how you handle this situation next. I can't wait to hear what it is that you have to say next. How many people do you think would have gladly traded places with him? Probably most of the nation. And yet Gehazi, even though he had so much already, saw that money was going to be the cure for whatever he felt was not right in the universe. instead of learning contentment. The Apostle Paul, when he was in prison, in the dark, dank, damp prison, said this. He said, I have learned how to be content with what? Whatever I have. Philippians 4:11. I've learned how to be content with whatever I have. Let's say that out loud. I have learned how to be content with whatever I have. Some people have said that the key to contentment is not having what you want, but wanting what you have already. It's to be able to say, thank you. Thank you. You know, the key to contentment is just learning to say thank you. Not comparing, not having a sense of entitlement, but just saying, thank you, God, for all that I have. Thank you for all that you have given me. Thank you, God. You know, here's the truth. The reason we get a sense of entitlement is oftentimes we think that we got to where we are because we did it by our own strength. We think it happened because of my hard work. I think it happened because of my clever decisions in education and then the decisions I made at work and all those things. And we kind of look at it as, well, hold it, I work hard for my money. I work hard for this. This is mine. Let me ask you a question. What do you have that you have never received? Nothing. Everything that you and I have, we have received. Oh, no. You don't understand where I came from. You don't understand my background. You don't understand how I pulled myself up by my bootstraps. You don't know the kind of family I came from. You don't know the kind of background I came from. You don't know how much hard work I put in. Really, who gave you the ability to do it? And by the way, who decided which country you'd be born into and which opportunities you'd be able to come across and what changes you'd be able to make? Who gave you the ability to think the way that you think? Who gave you the ability to see the way that you see? Who gave you those abilities? See, everything that you and I have, we've received. There's not a thing that you and I can point to and say, look what I did. And the key to contentment is acknowledging what God has done in your life. And it's humbly being able to say, God, you gave me these opportunities. God, you gave me these abilities. God, thank you. Everything that I have, I've received from you. And there's not a thing that I can point to that I could say, look what I did. We've got to learn that. Contentment. God, thank you. Thank you. Second thing, after learning contentment, in addition to that, pursue a greater vision. Pursue a greater vision. This is huge, huge. Jesus told a story. This is my ADD moment. Jesus told a story about a rich, a wealthy master, and he had a manager working for him. And he found out that the manager was mismanaging his accounts and stuff, and he says, hey, you better get your accounts in order because you're fired, and I'm going to need all the paperwork. And so the manager, he just sits there and he goes, oh my goodness, what am I going to do? I'm not strong enough to dig ditches. I'm too proud to beg. Who's going to welcome me into their home? Who's going to how am I going to have a place to stay? I mean, that was what he was looking for. How am I going to find a place where I could stay? And so what he does is he begins to run around and he talks to the people that own own money to his boss. And so he goes up to one guy and he goes, hey, he's bringing his accounting ledger. And he goes, how much is it that you owe my master? And the guy says, well, I owe him, 500 gallons of olive oil. He's like, I'll tell you what, let's make it 250, okay? Guy's like, sure, okay, let's do that. Keeping such bad records, he's got to go to the customers to find out how much is owed. He goes to another customer and he says, hey, how much do you owe? He says, I owe him 1,000 bushels of wheat. And he goes, okay, let's make it 800, okay? Guy's like, sure, let's do that. And he comes back and he brings the ledger to the master, and the master sees exactly what's going on. And he admires his servant for it. Now, you go, why is Jesus lifting that up as an example? And Jesus says, this guy is thinking ahead. This guy is thinking ahead. And Jesus said this. He said, look, the people of the world, they're shrewd about these things because they have a goal in mind. They've got a vision in mind, and the vision is, I want to make sure that I'm going to be comfortable. I'm going to make sure that I'm going to land on my feet okay, and so I'm going to be really good with my money. And Jesus says this, and in Luke 16:9, here's the lesson. Use your worldly resources to benefit others and make friends. Then when your earthly possessions are gone, they will welcome you to an eternal home. You see what he's saying? He's saying, look. He said, the extent of the vision that people in the world have is, I want to make sure that I'm comfortable. I want to make sure that I have a place to stay. And he's like, I want you to have a greater vision than. It's so much bigger than that. The vision is this, is that when you take your resources, when you take your things, when you take your money and you use that to benefit other people and you make friends with them, those people are going to experience something that they don't experience from other people. They're going to wonder, why in the world are you doing crazy stuff like this? Why are you like helping me out? Why are you doing this for me? And he says, what's going to happen is some of those people are going to want what you have, not here, but here. Because they never see that anywhere. And they're going to go, I want what you have. And some of those people that you touch through your resources, what they're going to do is they're going to say, just like Naaman did. If that's what your God is like, then I want him as my God. And what Jesus does is he says, I want you to have a much greater vision than just, I want to make sure I have a good place to stay. He said, the vision is this. There's going to come a day when your life on this earth is done. And there are going to be people in heaven that are there because of how you invested in them. And because of the glimpse of the grace of God. As a matter of fact, when you gave, you helped them to see proof of God's existence that they have never seen before because they've never come across a Christian like you. And what's going to happen is those people are going to welcome you, and they're going to say, I'm here because of what you did. I'm here because you took your stuff and you helped me. I'm here because you took your stuff and you invested in me. I'm here because you took your stuff, and at a time when nobody else would help me, you showed me the grace of God in a way that I've never seen it before, and that was the very thing that I needed to give me proof that God is real and that God exists. Because you're not about money, and neither was Elisha. It says this changes lives so powerfully. We had a friend a long time ago. Her name is Grace Wiltshire. She used to tell me stories about her husband, Jim, who had passed away years earlier. And Grace said Jim was like crazy. I mean, he would just tell people about God, tell people about how much God loved them. He'd go out there and he'd be always, engaging with people and stuff like that. And when they'd have people come over, they'd say, oh, Jim, that's a nice shirt. And he'd go, thank you. Jim then, before they left, would go into the bedroom, change shirts, put on a different shirt, take his shirt and fold it up and say, I want you to have this. They go, what are you doing this for? He's like, because you liked it. I really want you to have it. Literally, Grace said, people would come over and they go, oh, that's a nice lamp. Guess what? They were going home with. He was like crazy. It's like wild, crazy guy who just looked at any opportunity he could, that whatever he had, the biggest and highest value of whatever he had was in helping people to get a glimpse of what God looks like. And they get the lamp. And people would just turn to God. Because Jim was crazy. Can I tell you what God wants? I think God wants to make a lot of us crazy. So like wild nuts that people, when they encounter you, they're like, what is that? You're like, everything I have, I've received from God. None of it belongs to me. And if you like it that much, I am so glad that you could have it. You can't outgive God. You can't outdo him in any of this stuff. Listen, 2012 was our 10th year here. And forgive me if I've told you this story. I could not remember if I told this to you guys or not, but on our 10th anniversary, a lot of you gave to bless my wife and I, which I'm very grateful for. A lot of you gave money, and I guess it was to take a vacation kind of a thing, and it was beautiful. It was a beautiful expression of God's grace to us. Well, at the time, there was somebody we knew that needed surgery, and they didn't have any insurance, and I said, we don't need the money. I said, we don't need that. Give that to this person who needs surgery. And now, up until that time, or around that time, the year previous, I'd been looking for a vehicle, because here's what we do. When we take our vehicles and we put high miles on it, and then when we get to the end of it, Marie and I always like to look for someone to give the car to, or to be able to give to them for, a fraction of what the car is worth, to be able to help people get ahead. And we already had that in mind, and I'd been looking for a vehicle, and I had, just three simple requirements that I was looking for. Number one, it had to sit up high for safety so I could see over traffic. Number two, it had to have leather seats so that when I twisted, I wouldn't wrench my back. And number three, it had to have a Bose sound system because I like playing music really loud. By the way, if you want something badly enough for long enough, it actually morphs and becomes a need, technically, over time. And so I needed that. And there was a gentleman I knew who was a certified auction guy who could go and he could buy products from Nissan, because he was certified by Nissan that when dealers wanted to unload their vehicles and they'd go to these big auctions, it was limited to people that were certified to be able to be a part of those auctions. And he had looked before for a vehicle, we looked at one, and I was like, yeah, I'm going to need one. And so, we bid on something and didn't get it. And then I just got this check in my heart, like God was saying, stop. And so I just told him, I said, hey, I'm not really sure why, but quit looking. Quit looking. And then you guys did this whole thing, and it was so beautiful. And then we just let the money go. Didn't even think about it. And then he called me up. Then about 6 months later, and he said, "Hey," he said, "there are 1,000 hail-damaged vehicles going on the auction block in Nashville. Now, once a vehicle's been damaged by hail and they fix it, they cannot sell that the same way that they would with a car that they've just been driving as a demo. So it greatly affects the value of it." And I prayed about it. Felt like God was saying, "You're good to go." And I told him, "I'm in." And I said, "Hey, here's how much we can afford. This is it, right here, boom." I said, "I can't afford any more next. I know I'm going to have to pay taxes and all that stuff on top of it. So this is all that we can afford." And he sent me, let me get on the website, and there was like 5 different vehicles that fit those 3 categories. And he called me up and said, "Hey, got the vehicle." I said, "Great." And it was like the fanciest one of all of them. And he said, "So that's the good news." He said, "The bad news is the amount of money that you wanted to spend." He said, it wasn't close to what it was going to cost. He said, "But my wife and I, we just want to give that to you." And the amount of money that they gave was like the same amount of money that we gave. And I didn't realize it. Yeah. You can tell God thank you for that one. And I didn't realize it till like 2 weeks later. And it was as though God was saying to me, "You can't outgive me. And if I want to bless you, I'm going to bless you, period." And that's because Maria and I, honestly, we've had a vision for a long time for just doing that with our vehicles, to be able to make a difference in people's lives and to just do that stuff. Why? Because when I go look back on the end of my life, I know that it's going to make a difference. A lady that we worked with back in the insurance company, she became a believer. We gave her a car. And that thing just opened up her heart. She's like, "What are you doing?" And she needed one, and we just gave it to her. And there's just something about having a vision for your life where you can live life bigger than you are, when you can live life with a greater vision than "I just want to be comfortable," where you can go, "Man, you know something, I want eternity to be better because what I'm able to do with my stuff." I want people's lives to be changed. I want to be affected. I want single moms to be able to go out and get a job, and because now they got transportation. I want people that are getting back on their feet and getting their life in order to have somebody come alongside them and just bless them that way. And what Jesus is saying is, this is what it looks like to be a follower of Christ. Have a greater vision of your stuff than it's all here for you to consume. It's actually given to you to be able to impact people's lives. That's why you have it. That's what it's all about. How to honor God. How to take your stuff and just say, God, thank you. Thank you. He says, use your worldly resources to benefit others and make friends. Then your earthly possessions, when your earthly possessions are gone, they will welcome you to an eternal home. Here's what I always tell people. Never be motivated by money, but do be motivated by what money can do. Because money has the power to change lives. Money has the power to put medicine in bodies that would otherwise die. Money has the power to put shoes on children who wouldn't be able to have them. Money has the ability to help find cures when there are no cures. So make as much as you can, and save as much as you can, and give away as much as you can, which leads us to the next thing. Practice generosity. Third, practice generosity. Will you allow God to challenge your vision? Will you allow God to challenge your vision that there's so much more than I want to make sure that I'm going to have a good place to stay? Would you let God begin to move in your heart and blow apart your imagination? Would you allow God to begin to help you to already picture the people whose lives can be changed? In the book of Isaiah, the prophet Isaiah talks about a time when Jesus will come back, when the Messiah will come back. And he's talking about the state of the world, literally the state of the nation, but it's a reflection of what's going on in the whole world. And he talks about the amount of corruption, the amount of greed, the extent of lying that's going on in the world. He says that's what it's going to be like when he comes. All of this is going to be such a mess. People will become so overcome with greed that it's going to be kind of the flavor of the day every day. He said, except he contrasts that with this. But generous people plan to do what is generous, and they stand firm in their generosity. Of all the traits to choose, of all the traits to single out when it comes to who does God see as being righteous, he says when he comes back, the whole world is going to be all about money. But there's going to be people that he finds that plan on generosity and they stand in it. In the midst of the corruption, in the midst of the lies, in the midst of everything else that is going on in the world, that there are people that will stand in their generosity. But in order to stand in your generosity, you've got to plan to do what is generous. So here's the question. What does your plan look like? Do you have those values? Do you like go, I'm going to, and it's not, $20 here, $50 there. God really looks at percentages because he's looking at us to do things in proportion to what we have. So are you a percentage generous person? What plan do you have in place? The problem is that if we're going to have a plan, we've got to know where we are. And we don't really like to look at where we are. We don't like to look at our debts. We don't like to look at the stresses that we have financially. But can I tell you, one of the smartest things you can do is to get a good picture of where you are. And when you get a good picture of where you are, you actually can plan for generosity. One of the best things that we have ever done here is when we invited Joe Sangl a few years ago. And Joe Sangl introduced the I Was Broke, Now I'm Not plan and all that stuff. And here at the church, we've got a guy, Bobby Cooper, who literally sits down. He's actually doing I Was Broke, Now I'm Not connection group right now. Another one is coming up at the beginning of March. And literally, it's like this freeing thing where you're able to begin to put a plan together with somebody who's good at that to come alongside of you and help you to see the possibilities. And one of the cool parts that I loved when we went through it is, a part of it is, how do you fund the dreams that God has given you for making a difference in the world? It's awesome. And really, what he's saying is, here's how to put together a plan for generosity that you can stand in even when nobody else is. Here's how you can experience that. So one thing I want to encourage you with is, if you don't have a plan, then sign up. You got a Connect card right there. You can fill that out. You can check off, I was broke, now I'm not. For some of you, that may not be an issue, but maybe it's just percentage giving. You hear about it and you kind of like, how do I plan on being generous? And sometimes it's just a matter of beginning to take a step of faith. And so we have something that we call the 90-day tithe challenge. Many of you have done that. It's so simple, and here's what it is. When you sign up for that, what you're doing is you're saying, okay, I'm going to give God a shot for 90 days and see how I can make room for him and see what he does. And you just choose for 90 days to tithe. That's 10% of your income, where you go, I'm just going to make room for God. I'm going to see what he does. And when you do that, you get weekly emails from me on that whole issue to kind of give you a bigger picture and vision for your life of all that stuff. And what people do is they just see what God does. And guess what usually happens after the 90 days? They go, oh my goodness, God has like blessed me so much. There's no way I would never not do this. And that's another thing to do. Just do that. That's also in your Connect card. There's a guy that's been kind of lighting up the internet named Arthur Chu. Arthur Chu played on Jeopardy. Any of you aware of the Arthur Chu business that's going on? Okay, here's what he did. He went on Jeopardy, and he's like messing with people because he's like all over the board. And instead of like going down categories, like he's like taking out the high dollar things. He's hunting down the daily double, so take that out of the picture. But what really got people ticked off was when it came down to the final question. Now, for those of you that don't watch Jeopardy, the final question, you can bet on getting the right answer. So what you do is they say the question, you write down what the dollar amount is that you're willing to wager, and whoever has the highest dollar amount wins. So if you bet everything, then you can double your money. And what Arthur Chu did was this. He was in the lead, and he purposely bet just enough that if the lady named Carolyn Collins would bet everything she had, that she could tie him. If he would have bet $1 more, he would have won everything. And she would have gone home with just $2,000 for showing up. And she got the answer right, and of course he got the answer right. And when he did that, what happened was they both advanced to the next game. She goes home with $26,000 instead of $2,000. He goes home with his share of the whole thing. And people were outraged about it. Here's what they said. You're ruining the game. In the game that most people play with money, whoever dies with the most toys wins. Whoever has the most digits after the dollar sign wins. Here's God's appeal to us, and here's my challenge to us all. Let's be a community that ruins the game. Let's be the community that does that. Let's be the crazy, weird, wild people who are giving away cars, who are giving away stuff, who are giving away shirts. Please carry a spare shirt with you. We'd really appreciate that. Anybody who walks in here without a shirt, we're going to put one on you. So let's be that wild, crazy, unleashed generation that follows Jesus Christ so wide open that we are taking the life of God and letting him live so radically inside of us that we ruin the game. And one day, there are going to be people that will welcome you and say, the reason that I believed is because I saw evidence of God come through you. I never saw that before, and it's going to happen. Let's pray. Father, thank you for your grace towards us and being a God who lavishes on us, for being a God who gives us blessings, Lord, upon blessing, upon blessing, upon blessing. And Lord, that you are making us, you've created this incredible community of generous people, Lord. And God, open up our eyes to the opportunities to use the things that we have to build other people up, Lord. Give us the mind, the heart, God, the zeal, the vision that energizes us, Lord, of you looking and being a part of this amazing community and us feeling you giving through us and seeing lives change, God. Open up our minds, open up our hearts, free us, Lord, always from greed. We thank you and we honor you in Jesus' name. And everybody said, amen. God bless you guys. Have an awesome week.